Hello, BookTube, and I hope everybody's doing well. And this is the last two stories that we were reading this week for the Future History Project. That's Isaac Asimov's Future History. And these two stories are sort of stationary robot types, or he calls them immobile robots because they're more they're computers. But Asimov feels that because of the intelligence of the computers, they're much like robots, but they just can't move around. The first one is called A Point of View, and that was published in 1975 in A Boy's Life. And that's similar to the first story we read, uh, A Boy's Best Friend. And very similar to that, it's very short, and it's quite simplistic in its way, but with other things that are, well, I'll talk about eventually. But it's a story of Roger, a small boy in his early teens, and he's going to see his father at a computer research unit, and there he walks in on his father, who is in conversation with his boss and colleagues over their computer multivac, who are is clearly that there's a problem there. And what turns out is that multivac is they put in information, they want answers back, but they're getting sometimes different answers, so they don't know what is the real answer. However, they can't shut it down to do a full diagnostic because they rely so heavily on this computer to get information and answers to various questions for humanity, basically, or society, or economics, you name it. It's not really specified everything because that's not really part of the story, but um, Roger's father's boss says, once he sees Roger, take a break, take your son for lunch, have a nap, and then, come back and with a fresh mind, and we can look at things again. So he takes Roger, and they have lunch, and he talks to him about what the problem is. As I just said, that multivac is coming back with wrong information at times, and his son sort of says, "Well, he's not I'm not an expert or anything like this, but maybe multivac is like a kid. It needs some downtime, so playtime." And so, but his father says, "Well, we need to keep it going like 24 hours a day because there's so much information, so many answers that we need." But then he realized, well, just give, his son says, "Well, how about 2 hours of playtime?" So he could be like a kid where, if you give too much homework and everything, he's going to sometimes purposely give the wrong answers because he's bored. And as balking against, too much work. So his father sort of realizes this and goes, "Well, yeah, we can give that a try." And that's where it ends. Again, it's a very simple story, like a best friend. It doesn't go into finding out whether, like in a boy's best friend, whether the changeover from a robotic dog to a real dog works for the child or it actually happens. And this one, you don't know anything, but that's the sort of point that this is, and it was written for boys as well, so it's not a detailed short story in any shape or form. Very sweet, very short, says what it wants, and then moves on, and then it just ends, and allows you to think about it. The second story, called Think, is was written in 1977 and published in the Isaac Asimov science fiction magazine, the spring issue, the first issue. And it again has to do with computer. What it is the story revolves around Dr. Renshaw, who has been doing research with lasers, and up until that point, um, uh, like she's doing research with lasers to try to see if she can get more information from the engrams of the brain, like encephalograms, but more detail, because she's been able to pinpoint things of on and off um, uh, automatic responses in the brain, but also she thinks higher function as well. And she's been experimenting with marmosets, but she's brought her colleagues in because the head office has sort of wanted to know why she hasn't been putting in report. She's not doing the research that she was supposed to be doing, but she thinks that she's discovered something very important, but she needs the help of her colleagues to back her up, and they're experts in lasers. So she does a little experiment with the marmoset, and they can see the various grams, the engrams of the brain that are different, more detailed than ever before, and it's interpreted by her computer, and she calls her computer Mike. Which is kind of neat because it's she says it's my computer's Mike, so my computer, just a shortening of it. And she's tinkered. It's an aside, but she's tinkered with and expanded the computer as well. It's sort of like, runs her whole lab basically. So she does this, and she says that the higher function, that she thinks that, she believes that it's telepathy. She can actually, it shows telepathy, that the brain can do this, but it needs the computer to enhance it, and that they can talk together. So she hooks it up to herself and to her colleague, and right away, she asks him to write something down, and it's exactly what she says. Then says what she thought, and he wrote down exactly. But not all of them are convinced at this. They want to sort of control, like going out of the room and not, connecting it to anything at all, and then see if the person with the electrodes then has any thoughts or hears anything, and if he does, then it doesn't. It's not real. It's sort of made up. So they do this, and then all of a sudden, it's sort of the computer starts talking to them. So that just freaks them out, because it's sort of, they not only discover that humans are telepathic to a certain extent, but needs enhancement to make this work. But that the computer, they can actually now talk to the computer, and the computer actually has a mind of its own. And that's where it ends, with this big question mark. Like it's sort of it's a huge revelation, and has implications, many implications. But also great about this story is that he's showing that she is, well, obviously female, Dr. Renshaw, and the other doctors are going, oh, well, because there's this scenes of one of them, talking about how beautiful her hair is, and describing this, her profile, and all this kind of stuff. And there is this chauvinistic aspect of their relationships, and that's why she wants them to help as well, because if she goes to the to a head office, they might just pat her on the head and say, oh dear, you don't know what you're talking about, and stuff like this, even though she's a scientist and has done good work, which is clear, it's implicit in the story, but this chauvinistic aspect is there, and it's sort of balked against in the narration, and she does as well. So I thought that was very interesting as well. But also the aspect of the of the potential and the implications of now being able to speak to a computer, and that's where it sort of ends. You don't, again, like all these stories, you don't know what the implication is after that, and it's the same with every story. It's like with the boy's best friend. It ends. You don't know what's going to happen after this, where the parents say that they're going to give him a dog. Nor in Sally, at once the realization of the caretaker is that the cars are thinking machines, and they actually might revolt against humans, and what's going to happen, the implications that they don't know. And then the Bard, the one, oh, actually, what was the name of it? It wasn't called the Bard, I don't think. Sorry, I just have to look back here. Someday. And, where it ends with, him saying someday, 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 after being kicked. You don't know, there's implications and possibilities that are going to happen, but it allows your mind to think of, what's going to happen. Will robots, and that's where he talked about at the beginning that there's different ways of doing robots, but Asimov has greatly, combined everything. He's got the pathos, he's got the feeling and the understanding of the characters and the computers, and elicits emotional impact or input from the reader, but also ends with it sort of a menace, a potential menace as well, which I think is just fabulous, because you don't really expect that way the story is. You just expect a sweet story, but the potential or the implications are something even bigger and could be dark. And exactly the same way with the multivac story. It's sort of like, what are the implications of that the computer is actually like a child, and you've got to treat it like a child. What are the implications of that? And also, what are the implications of all of a sudden being able to communicate one-on-one, person to person, with a computer on an intellectual level? How does that change things? How does that change society? How does that change everything? So there's all that potentiality in these stories, and they're very short. The longest, I think, is Sally, like 20 some pages long. But it's just he packs so much in there. And there's also, like, looking back on these, like Scott Bryant. I'll leave a link to the co-hosts, Scott Bryant of the Bookish Bryants and Mark Richardson are the other co-hosts at the moment. And Scott Bryant was saying there's a lot of nostalgia in this. Yeah, there is nostalgia. Like in the first the boy's best friend, there's the nostalgia for for the boy to have the nostalgia he wants for his robotic dog, but the parents have the nostalgia for a real dog, and they want to implant that onto their son. And then in Sally, there's the nostalgia that the guy has for these old cars, and things, and that type of thing, in the sort of old ways, and also nostalgia at the end, because if things are changing, that they're going to possibly revolt. He has the nostalgia wanting the old days. And in Multivac, there is the nostalgia of being a child, of having play. And the father had sort of forgotten that, but once he's reminded it, it's a little tenuous there, yes, but it is, I think, there nonetheless. And also with the other one, there's they all of a sudden now have the nostalgia of potential. Again, it's there, I think, but it may be a bit tenuous of not having the relationship anymore of computer person, of an instrument, and all of a sudden it's going to be the other thing. And also maybe the nostalgia of again, a bit tenuous, but the males and the male characters in the story are sort of thinking the nostalgia of the beautiful woman and stuff like that, and trying to reconcile with dealing with her as a colleague and as not just a female. But there's also the sentiment. There's huge sentimentality in it all throughout a lot of these things, and it's for the same reason: nostalgia, sentimentality. So yeah, I think that is these are just marvelous stories. Yeah, they're not grandiose short stories, never are. They deal with simple things, but they can leave you. And this is where science fiction in particular, and Isaac Asimov is really good. They can leave you with thinking of so many things from this. I'm also going to leave a link below to Scott Danielson, who no longer does videos, but he does a blog post, and he's done a blog post of his current reading of this, and it's a really interesting post. So I'll leave the link down below. But also too, it is that he notes too that there's so much from, especially the first the boy's best friend. There's so much discussion that can come from this, from something so on appearance so simple and so short, but it can create so much discussion. Like he says, hours of discussion from 4 pages because of various things, and that's the joy, and that's what I love about this stuff. Is that it makes your mind go, okay, well, yeah, what are the implications of this? On the surface the story just seems one thing, but there's many layers, and there's other things that you get from it. Not only the enjoyment of reading it, and the emotion that you put into it and you get from it, and yes, at times, as Scott Bryant said, Asimov's dialogue and characters maybe a bit stilted at times. He not always gets, the voice of a child correct, at least in these two stories. The voice of the child, I don't think, is 100% correct. But that's fine, because that is not the purpose of the story, I don't think, is to get the voice of the child. But it's there. The sentimentality and the essence of a child is there, and the sense of wonder, and that's the big thing. You get the sense of wonder, and that's where I'll end it. And I'll be back tomorrow just briefly with a overview of next week's stories, or at least listing the stories for next week, and we'll go on for there. And I'll leave a link to, I've started a video series that's going to be for Isaac Asimov's biography. I only took him up to 12 years old in Tuesday's video. Bit shaky, but I hope you'll enjoy it, and I'll continue on next week. Take care, BookTube.